Most people admire the elegance hidden inside a small bottle of luxury oil. But almost no one knows what must be scraped, peeled, soaked, and silently taken from the forest for it to exist. Today, we follow the path of oak moss, a fragrance worth thousands, and the unsettling truth behind every tiny drop. Because before it becomes luxury, it is something far less glamorous. A living organism clinging to ancient bark, absorbing decades of rain, pollution, and forgotten insects. Watch closely. What you're about to see is not dangerous, but it should make you uncomfortable. In the beginning there is patience. Moss does not hurry. It grows inch by inch along the shaded trunks of oak trees, fed by decades of rain, by the filtered light beneath the canopy. Oak moss is not a single plant but a living lace of lichen, a partnership between fungus and algae, that forms soft green blankets on bark, on twigs, under shaded limbs. It holds water. It traps nutrients. It is a small, quiet ecosystem of its own. To stand in an old forest where oak moss thrives is to stand within time. The trunks here are weathered, the air is cool and damp, the forest floor carries the smell of earth and decay. Tiny arthropods live in and under the moss. Microfauna, springtails, mites, minute beetles, use the moss for shelter. Bacterial and fungal communities cycle nutrients in complex, delicate ways. The lichen is a living archive of the forest's microclimate. This lichen has another role, a scent. When the moss is processed, certain volatile compounds, dipeptides, monoaryl derivatives, and other aromatic molecules can be transformed into an oil of deep, complex, earthy aroma. For centuries, perfumers have prized these base notes because oak moss adds depth, persistence, and a quality often described as forest or earth-defined fragrances. That aromatic profile is the reason the moss attracts harvesters and industries across regions. The cultural and commercial value of oak moss is real, but so is the risk when it is removed from the tree and the ecosystem it supports. See sourcing in perfumery context. Harvesting oak moss is not a simple pluck-and-go operation. It often begins with people who know forests intimately, foragers and rural harvesters who have worked these trees for generations. The traditional method is hands-on, scraping moss from trunks and lower branches, sometimes cutting small patches of bark to reach thicker growth. In commercial practice the scale grows. Harvesters traverse hillsides and wooded slopes, sometimes using ladders and improvised tools to reach the patches, sometimes stripping larger areas in search of higher yields. Where harvest is unregulated or profit-driven, the risk multiplies. Large-scale scraping can remove a moss mat that took decades to form in minutes. The exposed bark dries, loses its microhabitat, and the microfauna that depended on the moss find themselves without shelter. Research shows that unsystematic harvesting without inventories or sustainable quotas harms moss diversity and reduces biomass, consequences that ripple through the local ecology. Sustainable forestry practices and harvest planning are not hypothetical, they are the difference between a resource that can be renewed and one that collapses. Scientific concerns about harvest impacts. PMC. Imagine a harvester bending low, scraping with a knife. The motion is precise but unforgiving. Particles of moss and fragments of bark fall away. At the forest edge, the baskets fill quickly. The work is physical and done often under economic pressure. For many harvesters, this is livelihood. For the forest, it may be loss. There are voluntary guidelines and community-driven harvest plans designed to minimize damage. These guidelines emphasize small patches, rotation systems, and avoiding harvest during sensitive seasons. They also call for safe working practices and respect for habitat complexity. If followed, these approaches can reduce long-term impact and help ensure that moss communities persist. But adherence varies. In many places, market pressures and lack of regulation make sustainable practice patchy at best. Sustainable Harvest Guidelines for Bryophytes. Bryology.org. Once harvested, the moss is gathered, bundled, and transported. In traditional supply chains, small bundles travel by truck to a processing house, sometimes a small cooperative, sometimes a regional facility that aggregates material for larger manufacturers. The moss arrives wet, heavy with forest water, and often mixed with bark chips, soil, and small creatures. Processing begins with cleaning. The material is sun-dried or mechanically dried, then carefully sifted. Debris is removed, and the moss is prepared for extraction. Drying is critical. Moisture content affects yield and the chemical profile of the extract. If dried too fast, volatile compounds are lost. Too slow, and fermentation or mold can alter the aroma. In modern facilities, washing and drying are controlled. Some operations use multiple passes of rinsing and slow drying under shade to preserve aromatic precursors. Historically, concrete and solvent extraction techniques required substantial material to produce small yields of absolute, a concentrated aromatic resin, and this drives a harsh arithmetic: thousands of grams of raw moss for a few grams of absolute. That disparity underlines why oak moss remains precious and also why harvesting pressure exists. There are several technical routes to obtain a usable oak moss extract. Each method has trade-offs: yield, fidelity to the raw aroma, purity, and cost. One common commercial technique is solvent extraction. The dried and ground moss is treated with organic solvents, historically hexane or petroleum-type solvents, and in many modern operations more benign solvents such as ethanol, to dissolve aromatic resins and heavier constituents. The solvent mixture is then separated, and through a process of evaporation and fractionation, a concrete is formed. Subsequent treatment with alcohol and removal of solids yields the absolute. This absolute is the viscous, richly aromatic material prized by perfumers. Solvent extraction yields strong, dense aromatics but uses chemical agents and requires careful removal of residues. Extraction methods and industry practice. Mecatech.N+1. Supercritical CO2 extraction is an advanced method used in some modern facilities. CO2 under high pressure acts as a solvent that can be tuned to pull different compounds without high temperatures. It preserves delicate molecules and can produce a cleaner extract with fewer solvent residues. The equipment is expensive, but the resulting extract sometimes better captures the subtle character of the lichen. Another method is vacuum distillation or steam treatment, used to convert some of the less volatile precursors into odor-active molecules, a technique described in perfumery literature and used for certain compounds. Vacuum distillation and advanced extraction references. img.perfumerflavorist.com+1. Throughout any extraction route, there are crucial steps of filtration, fractionation, and aging. The raw absolute may contain allergenic molecules or undesired colorants which are reduced through treatment. The absolute is often adjusted, blended, and sometimes enzymatically modified or treated to reduce the concentration of problematic molecules that can cause skin reactions, a non-trivial point for perfumers and regulators. Allergen and safety concerns addressed by regulatory frameworks. European Commission. Back in the laboratory, scientists analyze the extract. Gas chromatography and mass spectrometry identify hundreds of individual compounds. Perfumers and chemists evaluate the olfactory profile. The lab work is both science and art. Technicians measure refractive index, check for stability, and run allergy-related screens. In recent years, the industry has modified oak moss processing to control levels of certain compounds that historically caused contact allergy or skin sensitization. Regulations and testing standards limit the concentration of certain oak moss-derived materials in finished consumer products. This has changed how oak moss is used, but it has not removed the ecological and ethical questions around sourcing. Regulatory context for oak moss in perfumery. European Commission. Quality is judged by olfactory depth, tenacity, and the way the extract sits in a blend. For many perfumers, the presence of oak moss adds character that synthetic substitutes often fail to replicate. The lab reports inform which batches will be designated perfumer grade, industrial, or set aside for treatment. This grading affects price and ultimately the value of the final product. Once refined, oak moss absolute or concentrate is blended into formulations. Perfumers craft accords, balancing oak moss with citrus top notes, floral heart notes, and woody bases. It functions as a fixative and anchor, the note that holds a perfume to the skin and gives it persistence throughout the day. The final stages are meticulous: dilution to usage levels, stability testing, and strict limits on concentration to comply with safety standards. Finished perfumes are then bottled, boxed, and marketed. The bottle is meant to symbolize rarity and refinement, a sharp contrast with the forest and the scraping tools. For consumers, the bottle carries an illusion of distance from origin. Few retail contexts reveal the origin story. A perfume shelf shows elegance, the supply chain is hidden. Yet every bottle carries, as a hidden layer, the sequence of labor and ecological intervention that led to its scent. The cost is not purely financial. Oakmoss harvesting, when mismanaged, alters forest microhabitats. Moss removal reduces the bark's moisture retention and can stress trees over time, especially in areas where harvesting is intensive and repeated. The mosaic of microfauna, the tiny creatures that depended on the moss, loses habitat. Over-harvested regions can see declines in moss biomass and species diversity. Scientific studies underline these ecological risks and argue for inventory-based management and reduced impact practices to mitigate long-term loss. Scientific concerns and recommendations. PMC +1. There are social costs too. Harvesters in remote regions often face market pressures and may not receive a fair share of the value chain. Without effective community management and fair trade frameworks, local people bear the burden while global luxury brands capture most profits. This disconnect raises ethical questions: who benefits and who pays? Finally, there is cultural loss. Many forests are repositories of local knowledge, seasonal rhythms, medicinal uses, stories attached to trees and moss. Sustainable practice should respect these cultural dimensions, ensuring that harvesting does not erase the slow traditions that built the human relationship with the forest. There are practical pathways to reduce harm without eliminating the craft. The science and industry point to several measurable steps. Inventory and rotation. Harvest small patches on rotation so moss has decades to recover. This reduces immediate yield but secures long-term supply. Sustainable harvest guidelines recommend rotation. Bryology.org. Reduced impact techniques. Avoid stripping large contiguous mats. Use selective harvesting that leaves anchor plants and preserves microhabitat. Community-based management. Empower local collectives to manage quotas and share value, so harvesters have incentives to preserve the resource. Advanced extraction. Using CO2 or improved solvent recovery reduces waste and increases extraction efficiency, producing more quality oil with less raw material. Extraction methods and advantages. Mecotech.in. Transparency and traceability. Brands can disclose source regions, harvest methods, and community programs, enabling consumers to choose ethically. These are not theoretical ideas. In regions where harvest is structured and regulated, moss communities recover better, harvesters gain steady livelihoods, and markets accept slightly higher costs for sources verified as sustainable. If you are listening at this moment, you can make choices that tilt demand toward responsibility. Seek brands that disclose sourcing. Ask questions. Where was this ingredient gathered? Is there a community program or replanting protocol? Does the company use improved extraction methods to reduce raw material pressure? Luxury should not be tacit consent to ecological harm. A consumer's awareness shifts markets, and markets respond to willing buyers. Choosing a scent that is labeled responsibly or buying less, buying better, these are small acts that, multiplied by many, alter incentives at the supply level. We began in a dark, damp forest where oak moss grows slow and patient. We followed hands that scraped and gathered, trucks that carried bundles, labs that refined resin into an essence, and bottles that closed the story in glass and gold. You saw the arc, ancient growth, human intervention, transformation, luxury. This is not a call to banish craft or to demonize heritage. It is a call to see, to notice that behind an elegant bottle lies an ecology and a set of choices. The story of Oakmoss is not merely about scent. It is about how we value the slow processes that give us beauty, and how, or whether, we pay that value back. If we choose to keep using these rare materials, let us choose to honor their origins, with harvest practices that allow renewal, with fair compensation for those who collect them, and with science and policy that safeguard species and communities. Because luxury that arrives at the expense of disappearance is not true luxury at all. It is a borrowed beauty that cannot last. Botanic works, where nature becomes essence.